I'm Bob Rhoades. I am the paper maker in residence today, and I welcome all of you to this little presentation, which basically is going to give you kind of a very quick summary of the history of paper making, a little bit of history of my paper making, and then more principally, what the class is doing today and the stages of work that we're going to be going through. So to kind of give you the quick summary of the history of papermaking, any papermaking historians in the room? I want to know if I have to be careful. All right, so papermaking began in ancient China, 156 BC. A man named, well, actually, yeah. These are, I'm tempted to contemporize on so many things here, and I'm going to have to be disciplined about this. There are a lot of proto-papers, you know, like a model is one of those, which is an Mexican pounded wood paper. Papyrus is one of those, which is papyrus reeds that are sliced. You cut the green outer core off, and then you have a pith inside, and the pith gets sliced into little thin slivers and then laminated like plywood and then pounded. That's how ancient papyrus was made. I actually grow papyrus in my greenhouse, and after a friend of mine had returned from Egypt with stories of watching him make papyrus, I thought, Minna, I could do that. So I tried, and I got a couple pieces of effectively cardboard that weren't at all papyrus. They certainly couldn't have been rolled into scrolls like the famous papyrus scrolls are. But the paper that we identify as paper today that began in 105 AD by Sai Lun, manager of household utensils to the imperial court, started making paper by what you, for lack of a better description, would be felted fibers. You're taking fibers, floating them in a slurry, it's called a slurry, and then you put your mold in, you lift it up. The mold is the screen with a little decal on the outside that allows you to trap a little box of slurry. The water drains out. The remaining layer is your sheet of paper. As it's sitting on the mold, right out of the vat, it's like 90% water. So then you have to crush the water out of it, smash the water out of it, dry it. And as the history went on, there's different stages of development. The oldest known paper from bamboo was from 964. Wheat and rice straw papers appear in 1000. This is all Chinese papers. In Korea, it began in 300 AD. And these were travelers from China that shared their knowledge with the Koreans. Japan, it began in 610 AD. Samarkand in the Mideast began in 751. In Baghdad in 793. In Egypt around circa 1900. Now this is kind of the Japanese style or Chinese style paper, not papyrus, obviously, because papyrus was much older than that. In Morocco, about 1100. Brought from Egypt, the techniques brought from Egypt. In India, around 1400. In Spain, 1150 AD. In Italy, 1275. There's a whole bunch of little notes on here that are kind of fun, but I want to get through the history part for you. Germany, 1320, you know, which was kind of coincident with the movable type. So that meant that book production could really grow and become a big industry because they now were making paper in early paper mills. Began in France in 1326, in Poland in 1492, in England in 1494, Mexico 1575, Norway 1690, Pennsylvania 1690. So the first paper mills in the US were in 1690. William Rittenhouse from Amsterdam brought it with him. And so my travels took me to Japan. Yeah, if you think it would work better.
Leave the back one on, Molly. Okay.
So what you see here on the left of the screen is a wood block. And I'm not sure what the date of this is, but I'm guessing it's like 13th century. But it shows all the processes. In the upper left-hand corner is a man sitting on a pad pounding a pile of pulp. And in my visiting Japan, I kind of went to studios where all these things were happening. I mean, they weren't all happening in one room like this, but then in the middle of the screen, you see two people bent over with what's known as a su and a geta. The su is a rolled bamboo screen that is like a mat that you would like a placemat, but it's much finer in that the strands of bamboo are like more narrow than a pencil lead, and they're run through a draw plate to get very uniform and very round, and then they're woven together. I have a su at home. I didn't bring it because we're not going to be doing this type of paper making, but and then the upper sort of middle woman is putting a sheet on a board. What they would use is hardwood smooth grain boards to dry them on. They didn't have windows in the early days, and they didn't have plexiglass. So they let them dry on those. And then you have the last stage where they've been bundled up and they'll to be carried off for market. So the next one is from, I'm thinking 17th century, partly because of the Baroque ornamentation around it. But interestingly enough, apparently the paper makers all worked in the nude in those days. They were discreetly covered with little cloths.
You didn't tell us about that part.
I know, well, I'm sorry, we'll just, you're gonna deal with it as you will. Yeah. So you see sort of the same things happening here, but this is from Western paper making. So what we have is on the upper left, working into a vat. They're not, I'll tell you about this in a minute, but that individual is making sheets of paper, Western style, which I will explain to you when we start doing it. But you dip in, you pull it straight up. And when you get it just out of the water, you give it a little shake one way or another. And that, I mean, side to side, front to back, I mean, perpendicular. Then on the lower right, you see the paper beating machine, and how this is, they're stylizing it, is a crank that has a sort of like a camshaft, if you will, that has weighted bars that go up and down. As you crank around, the bar brings the weight up and down, and it's in a little pot below. This is like a trough, and so pound, 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 and so that gets beaten until the pulp has turned from fiber stage, depending on what fibers they were using. What was very common in those days was recycled rags, so linen and cotton rags, sheeting and so on, was turned into paper, and consequently they got very good paper because it was a good quality fiber. Then you have other people, one in the back is lifting the paper up. These are damp sheets, lifting it up and laying it on a line. And I went to a paper mill that dated from the 1600s in the south of France, on the Garonne River, that was still using essentially what you're seeing here. Instead of a hand crank, they had a water wheel on the outside. It was along a river, and the water wheel was turning the pistons up and down and beating the pulp. So it was relatively few people to operate the whole place, but the individual parts were forming sheets, hanging them in the loft, stacking them, and so on. Okay. Now, another place that I studied paper making was at the Fontaine de Vaucluse, which is in the southeast of Provence. And it's an ancient city, goes back to the 1500s. In fact, it was a home for the poet Petrarch for a period of time. Henry XVI stayed there and lived there. The story goes that and this was when it wasn't the whole, the village of the Fontaine de Vaucluse. Well, the Fontaine de Vaucluse is actually the fountain. It's l'Île de la Sorgue is the town in Provence. And what you're seeing is the Sorgue River, which flows from the base of these mountains. If you look on the far left-hand side, that bluish mountain, this is a limestone mound. It's at the base of Mont Ventoux, and water trickles down from the mountain and through the mountain to this fountain. And the fountain is up, about 100 yards from the water that you're seeing in the scene here. And that is flowing out absolutely clear, beautiful, and very cold. And the day that I was here, I was doing watercolor, and it was 90 degrees outside. And I sat down on one of those rocks that you see, and I put my feet in that freezing cold water, and I got my sketch pad out, and I have a pastel of that. I should have put the pastel on the slide, but it was like one of those moments where you think, oh boy, does it get any better than this? So this is the watermill for the Moulin à Papier Vallée Cluse, which is it means basically closed valley, because the closed valley is how the Sorgue gets directed into the town and then flows out and eventually into the Rhone later on. Now this is inside the mill. You were looking at the water wheel that is turning with the movement of the river, and then that's just to the right of the screen, which looks light. You can sort of see outside a little the outline of that water wheel. And then going across the bottom is this similar crankshaft. I'm calling it a crankshaft. It's basically big, heavy wooden blocks attached to an arm that has like a kind of like a rotating spindle, and that rotating spindle is causing these beating bars or beating weights to go up and down on the pulp, and they're just feeding rags into that and making paper. On the right of this is the paper maker, who is couching onto a post. You see he's probably got 20 sheets of felt there, and he's transferring a recently formed sheet onto the post. So it'll go down, he'll kind of like blot it out a little bit on the back to get the water to go away from the mold into the post, and then he'll lift it up, and then that whole thing will be put in a press. So this gives you an idea of some of the raw materials. So you see iris grass, you see nasturtium vines, you see Kozo branches. Now you see that I've harvested from this Kozo tree because I've had this about 20 some years in my back garden. So I harvest annually from it, and I keep getting new stalks about this size. Is sort of typical of what grows. So in a year's time, you get like a thumb size stalk, and depending on whether 2 or 3 come up, it's a steady supply. I've given some to different paper makers, and recently Chris Scholmer's told me, "Oh, Bob, I haven't been pruning my Kozo tree. It's just going wild." It's one of these trees that the branches get longer, and then at a certain point they just break off. So yeah.
Are you growing this on the coast or inland?
on the coast,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really on the coast.
really on the coast. Yes, exactly. About 200 yards from the ocean. So here are some other fibers. And remember, I asked how many of you know what a conch is. On the right this is an eucalyptus tree in my front yard. And this has been growing out, and I've harvested from it. Oh, let's see if I have any of that in here. No, I don't see any. Got more Kozo branches. But... Well, I'm going to show you some of the other things. This is the bamboo. So this is and this kind of gives you an idea what the leaf looks like. You have the little shoot that comes up, little round shoot, and these cover it. And as the shoot gets bigger, these just fall off. And so I just periodically go through the bamboo pile and harvest those to turn them into paper.
Have you growing the bamboo here too?
Yeah.
Bob?
Mhm.
Is there,
Yep. Yep, 100 yards from the ocean.
is there a specific type? of
Pardon me?
bamboo?
Well, yes, you don't really have to, but this is mostly cellulose. When it's green, you have the more fleshy parts of the plant, which don't turn into anything that you can use. I mean, the chlorophyll dies, and this is what you blend up is what you're going to get when you start with this. What you blend up with a green plant is you're going to get green coloring, and you're going to get starches and other things that won't help your paper per se. So
You dry the nasturtium vines also?
yeah, I have no end of drying nasturtium vines year round. My nasturtiums have taken over my wood pile, taken over half of my garden, taken over my greenhouse on the outside. So yeah, we have a lot of nasturtium vines to work with.
On the bamboo.
Uh-huh.
So just finding the dried leaves.
Just finding the dried leaves, yeah.
But they could be leaves from the tree.
No, because they're a particular kind. The leaves from the tree, it depends on the variety, the species of bamboo, but they would be like this, and they'd be about as wide as your finger and doubly tapered. But you can see this is like the base of the plant was here, the tip of the plant was here. So I know when I'm getting those. And the only reason I picked this is because I saw them in this bamboo, this paper making institute. And I said, well, what part of the bamboo did you use? Because I thought they can't be using the stalks. Those are just like, really hard and not very pliable. So they told me this is what you use.
So is this a timber bamboo, or is there a specific
No,
kind of bamboo?
well, I don't know the species.
Yeah.
I can tell you what it looks like, but it's not a timber bamboo. The biggest I've got, they got 25 feet tall, but the stalk is never bigger than that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, here is the agave. And what got me interested in the agave, we were in Morocco a little earlier this year, and we went to a textile plant where they were weaving silk. Well, they were calling it silk, agave silk. And it was, so the demonstration that before we went into the room where they're doing the weaving and so on, had a guy taking this leaf, this big leaf like that, and just peeling off a single thread like that. And what amazed me is that this is a short length. If you start with a leaf that's long, you can pull an agave thread all the way down that'll be just as thin as this, and strong too. These are quite strong. Well, maybe not.
That's true.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's that. Oh, well, let me just show you the other raw fiber. So this is the nasturtium vine, which also works as a handy cordage to tie things up when you need to make a little bundle. This is the rice straw tied with a piece of papyrus stem. All things from my greenhouse. This is very messy, so I'm gonna leave it there.
Do you grow rice too?
Pardon me?
Do you grow rice too?
No, I don't grow rice too. I got a bale of that from a local feed store, which they sell for like, you know, composting your garden bed and so on. And so I just used a bunch of it, made nice paper, so the rest of my bale sits moldering in my garden, getting a little more concentrated and a little more fermented. Okay, so the okay, that's the fibers. Let me go on to,
What's that tree there? The green tree?
okay, the green tree is a Kozo tree. So that's a paper mulberry. Once before, when I taught this class, they said, what's the scientific name? It's Brochiater paperferia.
Well,
You want to know? Yeah, I won't be caught up on that one twice. So in processing the Kozo bark, I already showed how you peel it off and then you pound it. And what I didn't mention is that so there's two stages here. One is just like, I had stuck some of these in a just a bucket, like a garbage bucket, to ferment a little bit. They actually did ferment pretty well, and the fiber was just like, I could go like this and get the fibers off, but not predictably.
When you
Just
say
some
fer-
of it.
Oh, sorry. When
What?
you say fermenting, are you talking about reading it?
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
okay.
what does that mean?
Well, you just let it age. I mean,
In water.
in water, yeah.
It-
I mean, field redding is like what you see the leftover, say, stinging nettle or something like that. When the leaves have all died, you've just got the dry stalks left. And some fibers, if you field ret, you're going to get something that looks like this. Then you can just harvest it and it's ready to be cooked. Other things like these have to be prepared in the way that we're going to be talking about. So the other part is to take the strips after they've been cooked, and these in the center have been cooked, and these on the right I'm beginning to pound. And so you can see it's going from a bunch of like stem-like things to more of a mash. And so as it gets more of a mash, more and more of a mash, then at some point you're going to test it for freeness. And so you'll take a little glob, you'll put like a half a cup of water in this clear plastic thing, you'll shake it up like that. If you've beaten it enough, it'll be just this cloudy mix. Probably you'll see lots of thick strands of unbeaten pulp, which would be okay if your paper, the paper you wanted to make, you wanted to have lumps of visible strands. Now, we're gonna all work towards like optimal pulp preparation for the first go round, which is why I'm gonna, go to each blender, take a little bit, cut it in, put it in. You're gonna see how to get desirable pulp. But in terms of these differences that I'm talking about, like, less beaten pulp or more straw-like pulp, once you get to like making pulp for your own individual sheets, which we'll do probably later this afternoon or maybe tomorrow, then you can play with the process a little more. So here's the pounding mushrooms. Now, we have a couple stories about mushrooms here. Nancy Dennison was good enough to share with me a whole bunch of conchs that she had been saving from, I think, a Miriam Rice workshop. So that means if you think of a Marion Rice workshop, it's at least 20 years old. So I took some of those home and tried just the beating and blending. And what I got was like a pile of sand, not something that would make good paper of. So the conch that I used, the one that I showed you the picture of, is fresh. So it's still soft. And what I have for you today is some of that plus some that Nancy shared with me that I soaked for a while and boiled. And so that's now softer and can be beaten up. I think we won't have to do any of the pounding unless, did someone bring mushrooms that look sort of like this picture here? I thought someone was going to do that.
There's a box on the back porch.
Yeah, that's, I think, the ones from Nancy that, oh, is it on the back porch, not inside the porch? Because I put one inside that other.
Inside, near the recycle bin.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll look
by
at
the
it.
sink.
We'll look at it, yeah. I think that's the one that I brought in that I was unsuccessful with.
Oh.
So we have mushrooms to try. Yesterday, someone brought me a little bag of mushrooms that were not polypores, were not conchs, but we'll give them a whirl.
So you think the fleshier mushrooms would work?
No, basically not. I've tried a bunch of them and you can get them to go into a slurry, but the paper that you get never gets firm. I mean, as it dries, it just sort of like becomes like dried toothpaste, if you will. Something in that spirit.
Oh, they stopped.
Okay, so now you see the blending and straining, and I just did this out in my little patio area. This shows a strainer basket in a bucket sitting on top of a colander. I only have this one colander, and we won't necessarily need to use the colanders because if you have the strainer basket in a 5-gallon bucket, you pour your pulp into that. When you lift the strainer bag up, your pulp gets all concentrated. And after we've done the first round of filling vats with blended and not strained, then we need to replenish the supply of pulp in each vat. And to do that, we'll strain it out so that you know that effectively, for every sheet of paper you make, you want to add another cup of pulp. So that's about the proportion. 1 cup, no, maybe half a cup. Half a cup of pulp will make 1 sheet of paper if the pulp is properly prepared. Also depends on the type of pulp. Kozo, it's magic. It always works. The others, not so as well.
Bob,
Mhm.
what do you say is liquid, you have to strain or pulp inside the net?
Yes.
Which one do you say?
Well, you inside the net.
Inside the net? You
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah, I was using the strainer colander just so that I could see how much I was building up on there, because when you're just pouring into the bucket, the rest of the water is in the bucket and your pulp is sitting down somewhere in the bucket with water, but you see it once you lift the basket out, the strainer basket out. This way I can see it as soon as I've, like when I have maybe built up a little layer like this in the colander, then I know I've got enough to use to make a sheet of paper with, a single sheet. Okay, this next one shows a vat, the big vat that's sitting over on the table over there, with pulp distributed through it. It shows my mold with that's the decal on top of the mold with the sponge in between. These are 3 elements that you basically are each going to need. You're going to need a sponge to blot the newly formed sheet. If you think of it as this process. Hey, I'm still on the screen. Okay, great. Da, 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 da. So here is how your setup will work. You have this is what's known as the mold. This is what's known as the decal. You line them up so they're squared on the edges. You put it in the mold like this or like that. You bring it towards you, sort of like you're scooping. You're trying to filter out fibers onto the mold. You lift it up, you pull it out, you give it a little shake like that. Now, this will probably have to drain for a few minutes. So you tip it like this and hold it over the edge of the vat and let the water drain back into the vat. It's not critical that it goes back into the vat. It just keeps it from being so messy out there. Then you have the sheet of paper on your mold and you cooch it onto your Pellon. So you're going to press this all down. And if you have a sponge, you can sponge the back of this. And what will happen if things are working well is the mold will turn lighter colored where the pulp has become disconnected from the mold, which is what you want. Now, if that doesn't happen, or if it happens and you get like 3 or 4 white spots, when you go to lift it up, which is sort of a sharp motion like that, some of it may stick to the mold, which means you just ruined your sheet of paper. So you want to make sure it's coming off that way, and there'll be some little failures this way, and I'll show you some things to kind of address that problem. But then your sheet is on the Pellon, and you're labeled Pellon, and you're ready to transfer it to, well, no, you're ready to press the water out of it by stamping it with stamp. I'll show you how to do that when we get to that point. Okay, so that is the forming the sheet. Here you can see a sheet with a layer of pulp on it and a different vat with the pulp floating in it. Here is, I have a greenhouse that's next to my paper making station. And so what you're seeing is about 10 or 12 sheets of paper put up on the greenhouse window.
Hanging.
Yeah, well, they're adhered to the glass. Yeah. No, the Pellon is pulled off by now. See, I take this sheet with the pulp on it, push it up against the glass. There's a little bit of a technique to this. You basically smooth it all over on the back and get it all in good contact with the glass. Then you slowly peel it down. And you have to watch to make sure that it's coming off on the glass and not staying on the Pellon. That's another little finesse move.
That's what you do with linen handkerchiefs.
Oh, really?
You
Okay.
Dry them on glass.
Uh-huh. Okay. After they've been woven or what?
Yeah, after you wash them.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So you don't have to iron them.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. So probably the linen is somewhat like fibers from paper making in that they're hydrophilic, and so they want to stick to one another. And if you get them all sticking as it dries, then it's flat. Should you let it just dry on the Pellon?
Lumpy.
Yeah, this will happen. The paper won't become thick and thin. It'll just be not flat.
Could you iron that?
Yes,
out?
you can iron that out, right? Okay, so you see on the next page a number of examples of different colored papers and different pulps and so on. Here's some where I used wasp nest little torn pieces. Now, I want to mention at this point, I didn't give you this on the list, which would have been a good idea, but I didn't. If you want to put things like flowers or leaves or things that you find in the paper, fresh things like fresh leaves and fresh flowers tend not to stick very well because they have like a waxy coating on them. The fibers are not binding to the paper fibers and they will tend to peel off. But wasp nest paper is obviously already paper, so it's fibrous. And so you put it on while the sheet's wet. You just push it in and you actually do it while it's still on the mold. Do your decorative things. Then you cooch it onto your Pellon. So it's Pellon side next to the decoration. And that's how you can do some of these decorative techniques.
Well, Bob, can you use for Oshibana in the
Oshibana?
pressed flower? Yeah, pressed flower.
Yes, you can. Right.
Pressed
My
flower.
experience is that most flower petals fade, and so they're not the bright colors. Like these fuchsias actually held their color fairly well.
And they were dried?
They were dried, yeah. But now you can see under where I have differing fibers, these are the kind of range of colors I've been going for. I wanted to start doing collages where I had a full value spectrum, like the couple that are in the gallery right now, the one called Big River Beach. So I wanted all the way to almost black and almost to white. So that meant doing things like bleaching some of the fibers and also getting different textures and so on. I'm going to pass around some things now, and you can look at these. And there's little labels on them. These are from workshops years ago, and they include a workshop in natural paper making. But the advantage of these papers was that I had a commercial beater. In other words, I could really get flat, well-beaten fibers. So it's easy to get real thin sheets like this with that. With a blender fiber, it's harder to get this kind of sheet. But that's why I'm showing this group. And people who are in the class, forget about these things. No, we'll get some sheets that look similar to some of these, but well, like this one is bleached Gompi and sea palm and sea lettuce. So I just harvested some things from Jug Handle Beach, brought them home, blended them up, put them in a mixture with Gompi, which is a really good fiber. One that I got from Lee Scott McDonald, or no, from Don Farnsworth. And this is some techniques called lace paper making. I'll tell you now in brief what lace paper making is. If you have a sheet of paper that's formed and it's on your mold, and you put your hands in the vat so that they're dripping wet, and you hold your dripping hands over the pulp, it will send little craters of pulp out. So you'll get these circles. So you could do, like a string of circles, or in the very fancy industrial Japanese papers where they do patterned lace paper, they have like a robotic arm that comes out. It's like a sheet or a layout of little jets of water that go on pulses, so they can pulse a bunch of shots like that, and they'll get little like maple leaf shapes or angel wing shapes. Or you could do that sort of thing if you had a dropper that you could really control your drops. Like slowly you just kind of went like this. I'll bring a couple of those tomorrow so people can try that and experiment with that lace paper making. So well, I won't read what's on every one of these, but you can look at them as they come around. Here's one made out of carrots. And
The orange part?
yeah,
Lordy.
and what you can note from that is that it was more orange when I first made it, but like any other pigment, keratin is like chlorophyll. It goes from colorful to brown. So that's that one. Yeah. Okay, here's black willow, which I had growing in my pond. Here's some stinging nettle. Here's asparagus. Here's mushroom papers. So these are from the days when I was trying all different kinds of fibers, and I was going more shooting from the hip, if you will, in what would work and what wouldn't work. And because I had this great beater, most everything worked. So that's what you're seeing. Now, this piece is a piece that was in the Mendocino Arts Center juried member show last year. And I've told one or two of you this tale, but Erin, the woman who was the Arts Center gallery director, I had spoken with her about a project I wanted to do. I wanted to do like a quilt of handmade papers with prints on them by different printmaker friends of mine. So I had contacted about 6 printmakers and said, I'm going to give you 3 pieces of paper. I would like to get 2 or 3 pieces with your prints on them. They have to fit this format and they have to be in black and white. Well, Erin said, oh, it's a great idea, Bob, but that would take up too much space and we couldn't commit that much space for the juried member show. You know, they have to get like 40 people in it, and this would have been like one wall. So I came on the idea of doing a book instead. So this is my first and only handmade artist's book. So and it's in the gallery out there, and it did win first place for the book arts collection or part of the show. And then I sent it to a show in Flagstaff that was advertised on the PTA website as a textile show. And so I wrote to them and said, do you consider paper making a fiber art? And they said, oh yeah. Probably not many people thought this way, but the person who responded to my email did. So I sent the book. Lo and behold, it got best in show and best in category, because perhaps I was the only one in my category. So anyway, this book was fun, and the rest of the story is that we were going to a wedding of my sister's brother, Mark and Sandra, their younger son. And so it turns out the show was coming down before we were going to be there, just the weekend before. So I said, Mark, would you go out and pick up my book? Because I'm not going to be there in time for when the work's supposed to be collected. So he went up and, checked into the place where the show had been and asked for my work. And the woman said, you know Bob Rhoades? So yeah, yippee, that was kind of a big deal. So this is two of the examples in the work. One of them is Kathy Carl, who did the photo etching process that she does. Another one is Helen Troxel, who's a neighbor of mine, lives in Sacramento. And then moving on to some other things. Two of these are in the show. The one is a life cast by my, good, we're on time. A life cast done from my daughter-in-law's twin cousin, Natty, who lives in Germany. And she and her husband were visiting. And so she saw my mask and she said, oh, I want one of those. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to have to put plaster on your face then. And so do any of you know what a life cast is? Okay, some of you do. So basically what you do is you build a box, cardboard box, that's like maybe 3 inches deep, and you fit it around the face to the point that you're not going to undercuts. Like you couldn't do the whole head. You could only do like the face up to about the ears. I did someone's ears one time too, just because they were good ears. And so then you put straws in the nose, you put facial cream or something like that all over. And I found the hard way that you should do like something on the edge of the hair too. I did this one time in a high school class, and I thought I was so confident I could have all these seniors just doing their own life casts. So, I had 10 people doing casts, and I had timed it that they could get it all done in the time of the class was meeting. And so they're all, with their person lying out on the tables and their face up like this in their cardboard mask. This is before I thought about the, Vaseline or some kind of hair cream on the hair. And so, it was 5 minutes before the bell. And I said, okay, get your masks off. Time to take the masks off. So they all came off except for one. And this one gal had this little bit of hair stuck in her mold. So I said, okay, we can get this off. It's gonna be slow. And so I'm prying and pulling, and she's kind of like, because I could see her face underneath there. I got the mask up this high. And I said, well, I could just pull it off. I'm sure it only has a few hairs. She says, no, don't. Because she didn't want me to ruin the mask. And I couldn't get in with a blade or anything to cut it. So I thought, okay, I'll scrape in from behind until because I had to go through this much plaster to get down to where the hair was. And then the bell rings. The class goes, I'm there with the one student. My next class came in, who were a group of junior high students, because the new middle school was being built. So we had to have the middle school in the high school with us. And so they were loving the fact that I was in trouble. One kid said, "Oh man, Mr. Rhoades, you're gonna lose your job." Which I thought, yeah, probably. So anyway, it came off successfully. It turns out it was only just like, 6 little hairs that were stuck in the mold, but I learned after that always to take care with that part of the process.
She'll probably pass that down to her grandchildren.
No doubt,
Or-
no doubt. Yeah, we almost got him for this one, but well, the nice thing is these molds last forever. So she could have made 100 casts of her life cast when she was a beautiful high school student, and now she's, middle-aged, kind of going, "That's what I looked like, back then 40 years ago." So this is the sculpture that's out in the gallery, the one of the lion. This was made by just kind of fabricating. I did a little maquette of that's hanging in my studio now. I was tempted to bring it to show you what the pre-steps to doing the lion were. If I should one day do a paper sculpture class, this is something that I would do. I mean, I think this is maybe another outgrowth of this kind of class. So then I also did one of a horse. My niece in Santa Monica bought that. So then I decided I would do a zebra. So this is like using Kozo and mushroom paper. And then the hair is the papyrus grasses. So I harvested these papyrus grasses and then painted them to match the color of the zebra stripes.
How do you make a mold?
No, in this case, it's just fabricating like you were creating a garment. You have to do darts and you have to figure where you have overlaps and things like that.
So separate pieces of paper?
Separate pieces of paper. Yeah. For the lion, there's probably 20 different pieces of paper
Glue
in there.
together?
Or no.
Glue them together. Yeah. I mean, for the most part, I usually make a superstructure that's based on the skeleton. So like I had pictures of skeletons of lion skulls. So I first made a stiff paper skull. So I'd have the eye sockets in the right place and the bridge of the nose and the jaws and so on. And the same thing with the zebra, starting out with the skull and then draping paper over it. So this is some of the masks. On the right is a little Comedy dell'arte figure that I basically made a wireframe and then just crunched up little bundles of paper and then wrapped strips around it and glued it. When the paper's wet, it's very moldable. So it'll, it's really nice to sculpt with because it has body and it will dry firm. And so I did the whole thing in kind of an off brown paper and then used a red paper for the costume and invented a beard and a hat and so on. So the lower one is Mushroom Man, and that was made out of all different mushroom fibers. I did this years ago when Teresa Scholars would have the mushroom fair in the college hallway. And so she would do little setups with the mushrooms that they had harvested, that gathered, and have a little sign explaining them. And then the second year she did that, she said, "Bob, because I know you make mushroom paper, would you do a display of artwork?" So I had a bunch of artwork that was all done on mushroom paper, and I did this mask. So the mask on the upper center is, it's called Webbing Bells. And I did this by starting out with a life cast of the same one that was the Cinnamon Girl that's in the exhibition. And then on top of a screen, I laid the mask down like this and in a big screen, like a window screen. And then I used what's called drawing pulp. You take pulp and you put it into like a squeeze bottle, like a ketchup bottle. You can get these for like $1 at the dollar store. So I cut a little of the tip off so the opening was large enough for the pulp to flow through it, and mixed up like 4 or 5 different colors of pulp, and then just started doing these big sweeping lines. And it doesn't get, I towel dried it a little bit on the screen, but just let it dry on the screen until it was all dry, and the whole thing just peeled off as one. So that's how that one was done. And then the smiling pumpkin was done by taking a pumpkin, making a life cast of it effectively by building the box, pouring the plaster on, inverting it. So I have the negative of the pumpkin with the stem. And then I cast that in casting pulp and then painted as you see. So this is, these are, the one on the left is a statue of David that I had in my drawing class at the college as a, as a still life setup. But in this case, what I did is I took wet pulp and just sheets of paper and just draped them on the mold, on the 3D, it was a plastic bust. And just when it dried off, it just pulled away, and then I added some decorative papers to give the little collage effect. The mask on the right is called Plum Branch Princess, and that is made by, again, a life cast. I had a student named Margie Menken. I don't know if any of you remember them, but she was an artist in a couple of my classes, and she wanted to do life casts, and she wanted to do a life cast with a pucker, like that. So this is one of her in the pucker pose. And I mean, when people do life casts, they get to take the molds home, but I said, I get to have one cast of this, at least one paper cast. So I used the paper cast and shaped it so that the eyes would be open. Because, life casts, you can't have the eyes open. Obviously, the plaster gets in your eyes. Yeah. So I did the life cast of Margie's pucker pose. And then I had sheets of paper with these staghorn ferns that I found in a winery somewhere down in Sonoma. They were just, retted with just the netting left on them. So I thought, oh, these would be great for a fish or a mask or something. So that's where that one came from. Now these are some of the fish that I've done, and I think most of you know the story of my fish, which is like I take a fish that I caught. The one with the marijuana leaves down on the lower left is from a carp that I had in a pond in my backyard, and they survived for a few years, but the herons and the what's another one of those predatory birds? Egrets. Yeah, I had what's the little short one, the very sharp bill? I'm trying to remember. In any case, they got all my carp. The pond wasn't that deep, so I had maybe 2 years of carp in the pond. But that one with the elkhorn fern on the right is that same mold for the carp, and the one up above that is koa seed snapper. I was in Hawaii and Maui, and the place that we were staying was right on Front Street, and they had all these pods on the ground. And when you're in a place where the foliage is totally different from everything you have around you, it's all wonderful. So I was harvesting these different things, pieces of palm and these seed pods, and the gardener came out and said, "You know what those are?" I said, "No idea." He said, "Those are koa seeds." So he said, "You take those home and you can plant and get a koa seed growing in your garden." So far, I haven't had any seeds come up, but anyway, that's that one. And then this is a bunch of the fish that are using the paper,
So
natural
you're
papers.
just using the raw fish, I mean.
No, what I do is I use the raw fish. Either I've caught, Ryan's caught, or got from a commercial fisherman, and then put them on a slab of glass, put clay under the fins to hold the fins out, because the fins will tend to lie flat when they're just, just fresh caught. And then I pour the plaster over.
Oh, okay.
And so it has to be like this, because a fish might be like this, from a profile, from a steak point of view. So you have to get it so it's just a dome, and that's where the clay comes in to keep it from getting any undercuts. So these are all, the molds are all made that way, with plaster negative, and then in the dried plaster, it takes about a week for those to dry. Then I do the pulp, patty cake the pulp. So this was a king salmon from the Klamath River that Ryan's mother-in-law caught on this trip we did, Alicia. It was quite an exciting event for her, because this salmon is like this big. And then this is a chili pepper. Oh, wait a minute, I didn't show you that one. This is a chili pepper, which I got in the harbor. Ryan gave me a call and said, Dad, they have a bunch of good fresh fish in the harbor right now that you don't have all of these. Meaning, like, for a while, every time he brought home a new fish that I didn't have a mold of already, I would say, I need to make a mold of that. So I have about, 10 of them from that purpose. And it says the end, but I've got one more slide.
Yeah.
This is my root head puppet. So I'm harvesting things from the garden, and I pulled out this really gnarly root with all these, strange curlicues coming off it. And I said, oh, this is too good. So I harvested about 3 of those, and I had them in my greenhouse drying out. And they looked like a chorus initially, a kind of an angry chorus. So it has a long stem on it, and the stem is like big as my thumb and like 6 inches, 8 inches long. So I made sheets of paper to be like a cape, and then an underneath kind of gown, and then 2 hands with, pointing hands. So I can operate it. I had a video of it doing things like that and the head turning around, but the video wouldn't load. So this is what you get. Okay, folks, that's the show.